Now then, you'll all remain seated. Anybody who tries to rise is going to get shot.
1:45 p.m. Four desperate, heavily armed men seize control of the train.
Open the door or I'll blow your head off.
You know something, people? You're going to be remembered the rest of your lives for the day you got held up and kidnapped. I mean, I don't know about that guy out there.
It's all a whim. Rob a bank.
I had it planned.
I do hope I have made myself understood.
Well, you keep away from this bank or we're going to start throwing bodies out the front door one at a time. I'm a Catholic and I don't want to hurt anybody, understand?
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Do it!
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we've been doing for over a year. So if you haven't made the jump, there's a lot of bonus episodes waiting here.
Episodes now?
Yeah, well, I think only like 30 or 40 of bonus ones there, but that's how many are waiting for you. Speaking of which, we do have 2 patrons to thank this week, and those are Jesse Stringer and Joey Carlo. So thanks so much for being with us, and hope you're enjoying the bonus episodes. The other plug for the week, always iTunes. If you guys are listening on iTunes, you've been digging the show, give us a good old rating and review over there. It helps us find new listeners, and we appreciate that as well.
Please do.
Those are your plugs for the week. I'm your host, as always, Josh Lewis, and joining me,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back.
Welcome back. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys, free listeners, would have heard from us, and we had Twitter shitposter, visionary thinker Nick Hewson on to do a 90s erotic thriller double feature of To Die For, 1995, Gus Van Sant starring Nicole Kidman.
Hell of a performance by Kidman.
Yeah, a total barn burner performance by her. And we paired it with 1998's A Perfect Murder with Michael Douglas,
our boy,
Paltrow, Viggo Mortensen. 2 very different movies about a spouse trying to murder their fellow spouse. So if you haven't heard that episode, that was 2 weeks ago. That was any podcast listener of choice that's available on. But last week, for patrons, your guys' bonus episode, we went, for the second time on the show, we went into spaghetti western territory. We did Sergio Corbucci double feature, Django, 1966, and The Great Silence, 1968.
Some heavy hitters.
Which is a really, really heavy film that saw Corbucci dealing with the pain of the deaths of, I believe he said it was Martin Luther and Malcolm X that inspired him to make that film about sort of systemic violence and trying to resist it.
Oh, wow.
So, pretty brutal film.
Yes.
Pretty dense.
Gut-wrenching.
And again, if you want that episode, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's episode. But this week, we have a very special guest, a guest I'm very excited to have on. 1, because I think he's a cool guy, and number 2, he produced one of my favorite films from just last year.
Yeah. That
made my top 10. I ended up writing about it for the film stage as best also directorial features of last year overall, and that was the film Blindspotting. Ooh. And he also happens to be the producer on, for sure, one of my favorite genre films of the decade, which makes him perfect for the show. And that film was The Guest, starring Dan Stevens as well. Regular producer for Simon Barrett and Adam Wingard. We have Keith Calder. Keith, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here, guys.
Thanks for coming on. We're really excited to have you here. But Keith, as the show goes, we have our guest pick the 2 films that they want to double feature for us. So why don't you tell us what those 2 films are, why you've paired them together?
Sure. I picked Dog Day Afternoon, The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, the original, not the remake. I initially, when you reached out to me, I initially started going through a lot of my sleazier sort of film ideas, and a lot of them were taken already.
Damn, like which one? Which one was taken?
Well, where I started with this was I wanted to do Assault on Precinct 13, which I love and I think is an amazing movie. And then thinking about that, I was thinking, that would pair well with Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3. And then when I realized that Assault was taken already, I was like, well, looks like Taking of Pelham is still here. And then I tried to think of a good match for that. And that's where I came up with Dog Day Afternoon, because I feel like they both deal in very different ways with heists that are set New York City in the 70s in a way that really feels like they capture an aspect of New York that's gone these days, that I kind of wanted to kind of revisit. And I think they're just. I really love that both movies start right into the heist, and then the story unfolds in really a contained space in a very quick period of time. I feel like that's something that I'm drawn to a lot in my own work. Like a lot of the movies that I've produced are very contained geographically, and also take place over sometimes almost real time, like very, very short periods of time. And there's something I always find interesting about that, and how you take constraints and make them cinematic. So for purely selfish reasons, I wanted to go back and watch these two movies to kind of steal some more tricks from them.
No, absolutely. No, I totally agree. I think that this has a very watching both films. I was actually watching both for the first time, which is a little sacrilegious. Usually that's Jamie's role on the show.
That's my role.
He's the one who hasn't seen a lot of stuff. But for me, I really needed to kick these off, and immediately I was like, oh, there's a mood and an atmosphere of early 70s New York City happening here that they both share, but with very different sort of storytelling executions to get across different ideas.
Yeah.
So that being said, I think that's as good as any intros we're going to get. So I think we're going to jump into it. We are going to talk first Dog Day Afternoon.
What are you doing down here?
Run.
Where am I going to run?
Algeria.
Algeria?
Yeah, they got to have a Johnson's there, so I'm going. 1, we get a helicopter here. 2, takes us to a jet. 3, I'm flying to the tropics. We did it.
Al Pacino. Dog Day Afternoon. A true story.
All right, we are talking Dog Day Afternoon, the 1975 American crime drama film directed by one Sidney Lumet. You might have heard of this man. Written by Frank Pearson. I believe Oscar-winning screenplay, right?
I think so.
Yeah. The film, obviously I'm assuming a lot of people have seen this one, but we always start for people who haven't, just in case. Hopefully you guys are watching along. That's what we structure the show to be. That's why we announce everything in advance. But the film stars Al Pacino as Sonny Wartzik, who was based on a real would-be Brooklyn bank robber by the name, I believe, of it was John Wachowicz, I believe was his name, and his sort of robbery and partner in crime, that was Salvatore Naturale. And Sonny and Sal both decide, the film opens with them immediately, as Keith already pointed out, starting their heist. And it begins kind of going a little bit farcically wrong, pretty much right off the start.
Off the bat. And I also love just like Pacino's intro. You can already tell that he's kind of just like kind of strung out in a sense, just very he looks exhausted just even going into the heist, let alone afterwards.
Yeah, I feel like this film has a pressure cooker that existed before the film started
yes,
and after
exactly.
it ends.
Exactly.
Which I think that opening, like the opening is just an incredible montage of summer in New York in the 1970s.
Right.
That I think you feel sweaty like by the time you even realize that you're into the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get kind of everyone doing their sort of like regular working class routine set to like Elton John's. I think it's Amarina is the song that's playing at the time. So you get kind of like almost like him trying to do like a country blues type thing that's going on, which is an interesting sound for him and an interesting sound to match the imagery.
Yeah.
And sort of immediately this robbery goes wrong. It turns sour. It escalates into by happenstance into a hostage situation in a standoff with the police that kind of takes place, I think, over, I don't know if it's like just a single day or if it's, I think it is actually up until the evening.
I think it was like a 14-hour day or something like that, 14-hour sequence.
Yes, and basically over the course of the movie, Lumet and Pearson just kind of complicate the protagonists in ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect of another heist siege film. I mean, Keith mentioned that he thought about pairing Taking with Assault on Precinct 13, and I think that has a certain character richness to it, but it wasn't as based in kind of, I think, like the class reality that this one sets up for you. I was quite shocked. I mean, maybe not quite shocked because I know this film's reputation, but I was immediately zoned into, oh, this is shot and staged as sort of like a genre heist movie might be. And very quickly, this film sort of sheds that to get more into a sense of a sort of class drama with Sonny and Sal, where you really feel for kind of all of the pressures that they're experiencing. Yeah,
his mask of a bank robber pretty much immediately slips as soon as it begins.
You start to see the heist as kind of like a symptom of a city.
Which
is a really interesting frame that both in the screenplay and that Sidney Lumet hammers home by kind of like letting a lot of these characters have their moments to reveal their complexities to you. I mean, this really starts to rival the idea of Stockholm Syndrome in the actual case that brought that about, where the hostages start kind of like actually aligning in interest with their captors.
There's actually a real quote from one of the hostages in the article that apparently said, if they were my house guests, they would have been hilarious. So they definitely got along with them for the most part.
Yes. And I guess because it's based on the Boys in the Bank, the Life magazine article. That's the article you're referring to. Yes. But I will say that I was, I'm assuming, Keith, you were too, since you brought the film on, but I was incredibly moved by this movie.
Yes. Yeah. No, I think it's amazing how they sneak up the character work on you over the course of the movie when it starts really as a pretty straight heist right at the beginning. And then by the end, I mean, I didn't time them out, but there's a couple phone call scenes that feel like they're 10 minutes long. I mean, it's really gets down into really incredible detailed character work in the script and the performances. It's a beautiful movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I was impressed particularly because it's while this heist is unfolding, it has a lot of comedic elements to it, mostly because I think just the characters have personality in a way that differentiates them, from more stock characters that you might find in another heist film.
It also comes off as they didn't plan this entirely meticulously. It seems like some of it was last minute. We have that great sequence when he comes in and he's trying to spray paint the cameras and he can't reach, so he has to grab a chair. And,
I love that it feels when it starts like they think they've planned this perfectly. They are coming into the bank like, we got this. We got it figured out. Yeah, it's hot and sweaty and I'm a little nervous, but we got a plan, and it's gone immediately.
Yeah, even when Pacino first brings out the gun, he has trouble because it gets wrapped around the gun itself. So right off the bat, it's kind of this like unhinged performance where he's just trying to get his shit together.
Well, and it's awesome because like that detail is what really makes this movie sing. Is that the idea that someone like the real issues that someone would have of the logistics of pulling off a heist. Like you wouldn't think, like you could plan it as much as you want, but you wouldn't think, oh man, the gun is actually going to be harder to pull out of my pocket if I put it in that way, or that's just something you can't plan for. And I love the guy who just abandons right off the start. He's like, I got bad vibes, dude. And Pacino's like, we already got the guns out, man.
It's done.
Like you could have expressed this like 5 minutes ago when we were in the car.
I also love that he asks to take the car because he's just like, well, how am I gonna get home?
It's take the subway, dude.
Like you can tell that character was the young innocent one that kind of just got thrown into this situation. I mean, he didn't even think about the getaway vehicle. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, and
I love that Pacino is normal voice Pacino, not the sort of like husky deep like movie star version of Pacino he became later.
It's kind of boyish.
He's got his normal kind of speaking voice in the higher register, and he feels so much more like a real human being than how he turns into later in script, which is this kind of big movie star thing. Like right now, this is like the pure emotional human character Al Pacino, which is my favorite version of Pacino.
And he has some great tics. Like he's got an eye twitch that comes out every once in a while and stuff. His attention to just small character details.
That guy's got a lot of stress. And I really like that he is like a really like complex, like thorny protagonist when you get down to it. Like I mean, like they don't shy away from, he does some bad things in his life, and he has some pressures that are within his control and outside of his control, and you just see a guy who's just completely overwhelmed trying to manage them and also do a heist because money would help alleviate some of those problems.
Right.
And I love that he does point out right off the bat that he's worked at a bank.
Yeah.
And that's how he knows how to do all of this stuff. He's just like, I know about the weighted drawers. I know the marked money. Yeah. Like, don't mess with me, guys.
Yeah. And I love that it's doing that detail is doing the double purpose of the story work it's doing, but then it's also setting up to the tellers that he's one of them. Like, exactly. So later, like this idea of that Stockholm syndrome is not a typical Stockholm syndrome, because in a weird way they relate more with him than they do with the police that are trying to rescue them. Which is very interesting.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting dynamic that builds between them, because, I mean, there's an especially telling conversation. I mean, once this, typically, as can be expected, it turns into a media circus where everyone's like, there's a huge hostage situation happening in Brooklyn. We got to deal with this. I do love the sight gag of there just being like 4,000 police officers. They were like, there's no one else have anything to do with New York
right at the same spot. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny how they're no longer there once they actually need them. Like when they start doing the driving later and they're getting like heckled and attacked and stuff. Like the police aren't there for that part, but they're there for the part where they can maybe shoot some people.
Yeah.
And I think I don't know. I mean, I obviously don't know the history of all cinema, but I it's the first time I remember seeing a heist scene where you see a news report happening and the video, and he's doing an interview and he can watch himself on TV as he's giving the interview. And there's something that feels very like that's the first version of the present version of how these things would happen.
Yeah.
No, 100%. And that's actually the scene that I was going to jump to, because that's an amazing scene where he gets on the phone. I think it's with like sort of like the presumably like the
news, I think I
think it's the exec producer of like the broadcasting, whoever's putting on the show right now. And he has a call, and they were like, "Okay, so why are you doing this?" He's like, "What do you mean? Why am I doing this? Like, I need money. Like,
there's money inside.
Why else do people rob banks?" And he's like, "Okay, why don't you get a job?" And he's just like, "Well, I'm not part of a union, and in order to get a job that actually pays me enough that I can live and afford the things that I need, I need a union job." And they were just like, "Well, why don't you get a non?" And he's like, "A non-union job?" He was like, "Ask these tellers, how much do you make? Is that enough to pay for your shit?" Like he immediately starts aligning himself that way, and then I love that immediately he gets so pissed off at the line of questioning about why he needs money that he goes, "How much do you make?" You know? And he's just like, "How much are you going to get paid for filming my death?" kind of deal. You know? And it's a really great sequence where, you know, it's obviously targeting, you know, kind of the sort of sensationalist aspect that we would look at this. And also, I think it's really important because the film largely breaks down to, we care about some of these issues or the sensationalized symptoms of these issues, but less the actual realities that would cause them to, you know, arise. Like a lot of Sonny's problems are things that could be dealt with, but instead nobody cared until he started robbing a bank to deal with them. Exactly. Until he starts sort of like upsetting the current order of things. Again, this movie itself, coming out in 1975, and I mean the story took place in 1972. It does have a bit of a sort of a countercultural attitude to it. I mean, obviously, we eventually get into reveals about Sonny's sexuality that sort of mirror.
And I mean, the very reasons that they're doing this heist in the first place. I mean, I believe Sonny's reason is to pay for his. I don't know if it's like a lover that his wife didn't know about or something like that.
I think it's his second wife. I think it's established that they got married.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's his wife's sex reassignment surgery.
Right. And so and I believe Sal, now this is, I don't think that this is told in the film, but I did some history review.
Oh yeah, okay.
And apparently Sal was actually trying to get money to pay for his siblings' care because he had a very alcoholic and negligent mother. And so these two people are doing this for very just reasons rather than just, you know, I'm robbing a bank because, you know, I just need money and I need riches.
Right, like I need to get out. Yeah,
these are very personable things that they're doing them for. So.
Right, and like that.
There's a really interesting irony to that too, because the character that Pacino plays, the real life version of him, he was robbing the bank for his girlfriend's sexual reassignment surgery, and you know, obviously he went to jail, he got arrested, he wasn't able to use the money he robbed the bank to pay for it, but when the movie was made, they made a life rights deal with him. And he used that money to pay for the sexual reassignment surgery.
That's an amazing detail.
Which is incredible. It's incredible. Like, in a way, the bank robbery led directly to him being able to pay for the sexual reassignment surgery.
So he pulled it off.
He pulled it off.
Heist successful just 6 years later.
And his relationship with Leon when it's introduced later in the film. I mean, because it's obviously introduced that obviously everyone is immediately scornful of his sexuality, like right off the start. All of a sudden, everyone's like, "Yeah, you've been kind of a working class hero for a little bit here," shouting "Attica, Attica," which was obviously the reference to the 1971 Attica prison riots. Right. Which is interesting because I also believe that Sal talks about not ever wanting to go to prison again, and the Attica prison riots. The whole point was, protesting prison conditions and sort of like human rights violations and things like this. So the idea that like these guys actually are part of these struggles, but as soon as they add like a queer struggle into it, then all the people outside are kind of like, we don't want any part of this. Like, this guy's a loser, whatever. And it's revealed in a really complicated and probably one of the most heartbreaking scenes when they speak on the phone that Sonny's actually like a domestic abuser. And that Leon was not only suicidal because obviously of body dysmorphia and like what she's trying to get the surgery for, but also because Sonny is violent. And the phone call that they have, which just has so much pain and heartache between the two of them, where he's like, I couldn't stand seeing you try to commit suicide, so like I'm doing this for you, and she's just like, I really am grateful for that, but also like you've really hurt me. And just like the history that is carried in like that, I think he's right. I think it's like a 10-minute conversation that they have on the phone in the middle of the movie. And the performance by Chris Sarandon as Leon in that moment too, unbelievable watching those two
I also
talk to each
found
other.
it quite sad that, as it's clear that that Sonny is pretty delusional in regards to how the cops are working him. Like how they're manipulating.
Don't try to con me.
Yeah,
I think that's what he said.
And in that during that phone call, he thinks that he's having just a conversation with his wife or ex-wife, I guess. I don't know.
Complicated relationship there.
Yeah, this guy's got some complicated relationships. But so I'll just say his wife. So with his wife, and he thinks that it's just a conversation between them, but the wife knows that the cops are also listening in and using that for information. And there's this a point where he even calls his wife out for that, and then afterwards just believes that they're not listening in anymore, which I found very interesting. Like, he's kind of delusional.
Like, there we go, I took care of it, they're off the line now.
Exactly.
He's like, oh, right, I believe you, totally. Exactly.
As this goes on, I just kept thinking, I'm like, dude, they're not going to let you go. Like, he's like, it's going to be fine. We're going to get a big jet. We're going to Algeria. It's going to be great.
Oh, my God. What an amazing detail when he's just like, because Sal, what's interesting about Sal is that Sal is clearly sort of like the ticking time bomb of the film. You said he's very quiet, and he's very clearly been very damaged and victimized. And he's very terrified at the idea of going back to prison, so much so that early on in the film, he tells Sonny, like, look, if you want to kill these people and throw their bodies out, like, that is preferable to me than going to prison, and I am okay to do that. And it's obviously a horrifying thing for someone to say.
Absolutely.
And then at the same time, you start to get after that, because it's pretty crazy that they introduce you to Sal that way. And then over the course of the film, they really make you feel for him and understand where he's coming from. Not with the idea of murder, but with how someone's brain could get to that point with all of this, with all these different sort of forces crushing him. And the bit where he confronts Sal, and he's trying to calm Sal down. He's just like, look, we can get out of here. You're not going to prison. I promise you, we are going to get out of here. And he was like, look, if you said this went sour, like, we were just going to shoot our way out, or we were going to die. Like, that was it. And he's just like, no, look, we can talk with them. We can figure it out. We can go anywhere. He's like, use your imagination. Where do you want to go? He's like, motherfucking Wyoming.
Wyoming, baby.
His country of choice. After Al Pacino's like, we could go to the tropics. I'm thinking about going to Algeria. Really funny.
To me, that's such an incredible New York detail too, though.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that you don't, I mean, what is Wyoming to you? If you've lived your life in New York City, like that is a distant country. It is not the same country you're in, even though of course it is.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, it's such a great detail. I also find it funny that Sonny wants to go to Algeria, because, I mean, we've talked about Battle of Algiers on this show. That was like shortly after that stuff happened. So we were like, you really want to go to like a political revolution? All right. But yeah, this situation kind of gets. The movie is mostly kind of like a series of kind of like quirky interactions between Sonny and like the police negotiator.
These are great. Yeah, I loved every
shouting
conversation,
matches,
especially the one where Sonny believes that the cops were coming up from the rear end of the building, and so they fire like a warning shot. Yeah, and I found out that is the majority of that is actually improvised. So that kind of like really free-flowing feel that sequence gives, where they're just yelling at each other sporadically, is completely real. Like they're just trying to, it's all improvisation.
Yeah,
so
they're one-upping each other.
Yeah. It's
that whole section that starts before, starting before that, when they're in the bank, and it's like the quietest, stillest moment of the film. Basically, it's just them in the heat in this bank, and it's shot in these long takes of them all in there. And then, Pacino goes to the back because it's so hot, the air conditioning's out, and he's going to try to figure it out. And as soon as he realizes something's happening at the back, it is one of the most incredibly edited, chaotic sequences of all of this reaction as he shoots out the window, all the cops' reaction, the crowd's reaction. It's just goes from this incredibly long takes, really long, like kind of getting you into this specific area. And then we should talk. I mean, the Didi Allen is probably one of the best editors of all time. And you see that work throughout this movie. It's amazing how much they play with that long takes, long kind of getting you to settle into this thing, and then these really fast edits, almost like way ahead of where you would think cinema was at that time. Just really kind of like getting really that crazy thing, and then going from that into this like improv actor to actor thing. Like there's just so many techniques that are just at total mastery levels in this movie.
It completely switches from like kind of like these calm interactions where these people are sort of identifying with each other and getting along with each other. And I mean, I love that all the tellers start like joking around about the one who's prudish and doesn't want to swear, and like they're just having like very normal interactions, and it's seemingly kind of calming for Sonny and Sal. And then, immediately they feel threatened, and that kind of like paranoid energy just like takes over the filmmaking. As like, everything starts getting kind of like jumbled up, and he's rushing to the front, he's yelling his ass off. And I mean, he's very distrustworthy of everyone outside, and not completely unfoundedly, but it is to a level where it's like he sees all the ways that this could go wrong, and he's trying to avoid them as much as possible. But also, he seems like he's also a bit of a playful asshole about it too.
Yeah,
like that
he's
one,
a showman.
that one, which is really scary. When he sends the African American guy out, who's kind of like sick, or
the first hostage, the first hostage he sends out.
He sends
and
him
they all
out
assume that he's the
because they assumed that a girl was getting let out, and the cops immediately start trying to shoot him because they think that it's like that it's Al Pacino's character. And they were like, "Dude, what are you doing?
Hold your fire."
And obviously, it's a huge systemic problem that the first reaction for the police would be to just shoot this guy down immediately. But at the same time, it's like Sonny would be aware of that. And he even goes. I mean, we got to talk a little bit about all these New York accents are really great as they go through them. But he's just like, that was pretty smart or whatever that he says. And it's like, smart. Just very risky of someone else's life in that particular situation.
Yeah. And my favorite Stockholm Syndrome moment is, and it's basically in the background, is where Pacino gives his gun to one of the tellers to show them how to do marine drills. And you're just like, this is crazy. Like they've formed such a bond that he's literally giving the hostage his like assault rifle to teach her how to do marine like dance moves, basically.
Yeah, and that tool is the one thing you would assume is keeping her from revolting, and now she has it. And it's
it just shows you how fast everyone immediately kind of relates to Sonny and Sal's struggles, and they understand. They're like, maybe I wouldn't go and rob a bank, but it starts to make sense why someone in that situation would rob a bank and why they would feel that desperate. And I mean, that kind of like unhinged raw nerve sweatiness is right there from the beginning. So like that desperation, you feel it like the second the movie opens. And then all of a sudden, all the movie does is just kind of slowly contextualize it for you. It starts to reveal where it's come from, how it's been brought about, why it hasn't been stopped yet.
Yeah.
Have you guys seen Cool Hand Luke?
No.
I still haven't seen that one either.
Oh my god. Okay, so that if we were to add a third movie, we could have added that. But that's Frank Pearson's other like big script that he wrote, and it's as an anti-establishment movie, it goes so hand in hand with this one. And that's your homework after this episode. You got to watch.
Absolutely. No, we're taking the recommendation.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, just the way that, I mean, again, this would have, a lot of this stuff, I mean, in 75, it would have been a little bit more talked about, but when the situation went down in 72, this would have been during huge countercultural movements. I mean, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement would have been 68 and 69, and also, I mean, Stonewall was 69, which is how you get the queer struggle in here as well, and then obviously they name drop Attica over and over again, which was 1971, and it was, you can see that they're kind of getting the riotous people on their side who are interested in this, and what's fascinating is that the second some of the rioters turn on him because of his sexuality, all of a sudden he has sort of like gay activists show up and start cheering Sonny on the sidelines and stuff like that, and it's amazing how they harness that energy, and that energy that they form in the crowd is really the only thing that stops the police from coming in and shooting them.
Completely.
Really.
Because it would be such a public massacre of likable people.
Yeah, it's almost a guarantee that they're only viewing it as like, that'd be bad optics.
Yeah.
You know, like if we just went in and slaughtered them.
They have to get them to the airport so they can shoot them.
Yeah, exactly.
Which, I mean,
because they can't do it in front of that crowd and in front of the press and all of that.
Exactly, which will probably angle towards this finale here, but this is just horrifying.
Yeah, this so sad to watch.
And I mean, the way that Al Pacino calibrates his performance in this moment too, where he's very clearly reassuring Sal that this thing that you knew was going to happen this whole time isn't going to happen. I promise. We figured it out. They don't have to do it anymore. We're done. Yeah. We're going to let everyone out. We're going to get our trip out of here. That's it. It's over. And I mean, this also follows him. Where you don't fully, you feel like Sonny is kind of weaponizing this on Sal because he doesn't want Sal to freak out, and also he thinks it might work, but he's also left a will in case it doesn't work because he's not fully convinced. And the will scene, my God, also, again, it feels just like the phone conversation where it's just heartbreaking. I mean, the idea that someone would leave their life insurance policy and leave it for his wife's reassignment surgery that he does. He's just like, look, I'm not worth much. I'm probably worth like $10,000. Leave 7 of that for my current wife and leave the rest for my previous wife and kids.
Yeah.
And the fact that is actually a better out for him than, actually finding a job of any sort. The fact that there's a society that's like that is a problem. And it's something that we really still haven't dealt with. But it's so fascinating to go back and watch it and see how in the conversation this was even in, the early 70s in New York.
Do you also think that I read it a bit as, even though he's constantly reassuring Sal, that scene when he made the will seemed to signify that he doesn't really believe that it's going to work out for him. Yeah, I think he's almost trying to delude himself too. The whole
I think
time.
that's partially true. I think it's a little bit.
I think underneath he really knows that.
I think he's preparing that this situation could still go wrong, but he's really trying to put on a performance for Sal of like, we got this.
We're gonna be okay.
We're gonna be okay. Come on, Sal. Look. We're getting there. We're going to Wyoming or whatever. Which is just, and then as they drive them there, there's that cop in the front with the detail who's always like, point that gun up. Point that gun up.
And you know where that's leading.
Well, yeah, and I thought it was a legitimate concern where it was like, yeah, you wouldn't want Sal's gun going off. But then, as they start making eyes at each other and, the tension kind of starts to build, and there's that really, really heartwarming moment where the one hostage gives her rosary beads to Sal, being like, because he mentions mentions earlier in the film that he's really scared of the idea of taking a plane. He's never been on a plane. He couldn't afford to take a plane anywhere. Yeah. And he's like, here, for good luck for your first plane ride. And he seems like reassured by that. And again, Keith was pointing out the editing in this, but the editing in this sequence where you get the look on these faces as Sonny is kind of watching this unfold, and as the officers are waiting for their opportune moment to pull out a gun and just shoot Sal in the back like a dog. It's the only actual murder that takes place in this movie because the situation was over with. The hostages were out. They were good. It was over. and instead they still decided to just point blank shoot Sal.
Yeah, and it seems pretty obvious they could have waited till they were out of the van and just arrested the man. You know, at the very least.
Yeah.
Because it's painted, and I looked it up, and that's pretty much how it went down.
Oh, really? Yeah, I didn't look at the article.
The only thing that was different is they didn't get him in the head; they got him in the chest, which I mean I could argue might have even been worse because he had to suffer a chest wound.
Right, it wasn't like an instant.
So, but I mean, regardless, it was that cold, and it's really sad. It's very sad because you spend 2 hours with this guy, you know, understanding his motivations and his past, and just seeing him as a human being, and then they slaughter him like an animal. You know?
Yeah, and the exact thing that they were, you know, sort of like resisting kind of just is reinstated. They were just like, everyone goes back to their jobs, nothing happened here, everything's fine. This is the way that just the world is, folks.
Yeah.
When you just you know that you're watching this movie, that there's all kinds of Sonny and Sals out there in the world that are just, you know, one desperate moment away from, you know, needing real help. These people just needed help.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
You know, so it was a, you know, and again, they both mentioned that they're Vietnam War veterans too. So again, it's just using skills.
That's a big.
And for me too, there was a bit of coldness. Just, I mean, you know, the age isn't that big of a thing, but the real Sal was actually 18.
Oh my god!
So you know, it's not like it's a big difference. Obviously, violence is violence and brutality is brutality, but it's just like an 18-year-old, like a teenager. You just point blank in the. It's just cold. It's a system that needs to be changed. Good Lord.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Keith, any thoughts on the ending?
It's a brutal ending, and it really it hits hard.
Yeah, well, because I mean the look on Pacino's face and everything as he's just it's not quite disbelief, like, because it feels like he was prepared for it, but it still feels like he was still shocked.
There, obviously too, like because it felt like. I don't know exactly who came up with the plan, but it definitely felt like Sonny was the head of the group. So I bet there was some guilt he felt in that regard, even though it's, I mean, not really his fault. But yeah, it's a heavy ending.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think we'll enter the reductive rating round on this one. For you, Keith, this is the part where we kind of do remove all the words and nuance, and we give the film a rating between 1 and 5, but it's also turned into kind of like final statements. So if there's a scene that you felt like you didn't get a chance to mention, or you want to mention it, you can also do it here. For me, it's probably pretty obvious. This is a 5 for me. I feel like we haven't done a 5 on a free episode in a little bit, but this one was for me, and I think specifically because, again, the way that this opens in kind of like a genre structure of a bank heist, and then subtly reveals itself to be sort of like a class and character drama, and a particularly melancholy and soulful one at that, with, you know, questions of class and queer struggle and pressures and stresses of a particular city. We didn't get into a lot of the New York detail of this, but the actual sort of like grit of location was felt in this as well. And I mean, we'll really get into that when we talk about Taking of Pelham, which is takes that to, I think, even another level. But I think just that the way that this sort of like this conflict and standoff is structured to get you to sort of accept the people involved in it, and sort of the stresses and the complex intersection of how all of these realities kind of relate to one another, and how it's resulted in this very, you know, this large symptom that everyone's very excited by. I think that media part is really important too, just because of the way everyone is so excited to be part of this. They were like, wow, this is so unique, this is so bizarre.
There's that scene actually, remember they deliver food, and the delivery man's like, I'm a star, I'm a star.
That's a great moment too, where the pizza guy gets it on it. Yeah, everyone's so excited about, you know,
it's like just an event, bizarre, to be a part of something.
I want to zoom into that moment a little longer, because Pacino's character, he takes the marked money from the bank, the marked $5 bills, and then he uses it to pay for the pizza, and then throws the rest out to the crowd to get the crowd to love him. And they have no idea he's just thrown a bunch of marked.
That's a great moment.
That's a solid point.
Well, yeah, because there's actually a part in the dialogue before where
he says, being a bit deceptive himself.
Well, yeah, because what's funny too is the bit where he does that before he actually does it. He asks where are the marked bills? Because he's going to go outside. He's
Right.
specifically grabbing the marked bills to go and do it. And and the way that everyone kind of just reacts to this situation, where everyone's watching it unfold in this kind of like exciting way, and they start to slowly lose interest in it as the real issues and the real people and the kind of like the mundane like realities of these people's lives of poverty and sexuality and things start to actually unfold, and it becomes like a really unglamorous look at these really complicated people who did a bad thing out of complete desperation, and in the end they suffer these really horrible consequences for it. And I will make a special note again for Chris Sarandon's performance, which I think there's only 2 or 3 scenes with Leon, and they're phenomenal. Conversing with the police, very coldly and very hurt, and then with Pacino, where it's still very hurt and heart-aching, but there's a little bit more warmth to it, as you can see that there's a genuine love there for Pacino's character. And then obviously Pacino in this is like complete sweaty raw nerve stuff that is as vulgar as it is charismatic, and you can't look away from it, and incredibly sad stuff. So this was a 5, pretty easy 5 for me.
Nice. I'm also gonna give it a 5. It was funny, like I was watching the film, and especially after the end, I went back and I wanted to look at a bit of the history, the real story, just to see if there was like any justification for the outright violence that the cops took on Sal. Just to see like what the real story was. Maybe they changed a few things, and it didn't. Like as what I could read, it seemed that that's exactly as it played out, and this movie just does such a great job of making you realize it's these situations that people get themselves into, or are just by complete happenstance, can result in violence, and there's not much you can...
Well, I think the big thing is that these people have really complicated lives, and the idea of a police force answering that is that they only... it's a very simplistic response.
Right, and
we stop bad guys from doing things, but that response doesn't work in a situation where you're dealing with complex human lives.
And what I found interesting, too, was the use of, like, when they were just talking, when it was the cop and Pacino, even though the cop is manipulating him, there's still an element of humanity there, right? And as soon as that FBI guy comes in, it's just cold. It's just like a robot that he's connecting with, and
because he's dealing with a fellow New Yorker.
Right, you end up missing that cop. Like you're like, bring that guy back. Like like at least he was a human being trying to connect with somebody, and just to see such a raw human story, and with what seems to just be like a procedural killing, is really, really disheartening and sad. And it does a masterful job of making you empathize with these characters, and then unfortunately making you feel extremely depressed about losing them.
Absolutely.
But so it's a 5. It's unreal.
For you, Keith?
It's for sure a 5-star movie for me. I came into it because I've seen it. This is, I think, the 3rd time I've seen it, and the last time was maybe 10 years ago. So I was watching it, and I was prepared for it not to be a 5-star movie, because I was like, I watch a lot of these movies that deal with social issues in the past, and there's always some horrible misstep they take that just makes it impossible for me to love the movie. And this movie, I mean, to think of a movie from the mid 70s that deals with a trans love story like at the heart of it, and that it handles it so humanly and feels like it would be current today is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that might wrap it up for Dog Day Afternoon, and we are going to be right back, and we are going to be talking The Taking of Pelham 123, not the Tony Scott version.
How long does it take to get all that money together anyway?
Just not gonna make it.
We'll never make it. The passengers are dead ducks.
What the hell they expect for that lousy 35 cents to live forever?
Walter Matthau, Robert Shaw. The most spectacular hijack in history. The Taking of Pelham 123.
All right, we are back and we are talking The Taking of Pelham 123. It is a 1974 American sort of thriller film directed by Joseph Sargent, who we have actually talked about once before on the show. When we did our Burt Reynolds double feature, we talked White Lightning.
Yeah, that was great.
Which we were actually very impressed with Joseph Sargent's sort of like competent journeyman work on that one, as he kind of took over the film from Spielberg, who at one point I think was in production for that, and he did a really good job on it. And so this is our second time talking about Joseph Sargent, and the boy done did it again. He took a very sort of workman approach. This one I think particularly even more effective, mostly because this film itself is about a bunch of sort of workmen, and this is one of my all-time favorite subgenres of people doing their job cinema. I just love this stuff. I don't really know. I don't know what it is about it. I really find watching people who are, good at what they do in their natural environment that they are in every day, and maybe they have to deal with a particular crisis situation, but they're equipped to do it because they're there every day.
Yeah, I agree.
I really like movies like that, and this also follows along with my current theory that I've been workshopping for a few weeks now, that if the movie's got a train, it gets upgraded to cinema. That's just how it works. It's got a train in it. So this one immediately hits with a double whammy. We got Joseph Sargent, we got guys doing their jobs, and we got a train. Yep.
A recipe for a masterpiece.
And it's great. This has a very simple premise to it, and a bunch of recognizable working actors doing a bunch of the roles. And it is about a New York City heist where a bunch of armed men hijack a subway car, and they demand ransom for the passengers. And what unfolds is exactly that. The logistics of how that would work, who would be dealing with it, how they might actually perhaps get away with it. And I found this film really, we'll jump off the start probably by saying that in comparison to Dog Day Afternoon, this is probably less of a character drama.
Yeah, it's more plot heavy.
Yes, a little bit more plot heavy. It's not to say that it's without character. I think a lot of these actors and a lot of these moments, they do get personalities.
Mm-hmm.
But the film is definitely more of an ensemble film of the just logistics of how something like this would go down and how it would work.
Yeah.
With a lot of New York detail.
I would say this is a funnier movie.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I would say that the sort of farcical elements of Dog Day Afternoon when the heist goes wrong are pretty funny, but beyond that movie very quickly transitions into some real subjects that hurt your soul a little bit.
Yeah, this one kind of keeps a tone throughout, rather than doing that 180 switch on you.
Yes, I do like that it wasn't completely, that it's still sort of functionally as an overall piece does kind of portray kind of like a New York City still in crisis.
This is still very gritty. For sure.
Well, this came out in a period obviously when there was obviously rising crime rates and poverty and things like this. That a lot of filmmakers turned around and made some pretty dire films about these subjects. I'm pretty sure Death Wish came out the same year, which tackles a very New York grit, but without the sense of sort of camaraderie. That's a film about fantasizing about going around killing poor people.
Just killing criminals.
Because you want to. Whereas this film actually does kind of have a sense of look at the day-to-day people on the ground of a city that is sort of, marked with corruption and problems that people have. Part of the reason this heist unfolds in the first place is, again, one of the guys involved is a laid-off MTA worker.
Yeah,
right.
Who's just looking to pay his bills, and then obviously a lot of the people who are dealing with the crisis themselves. I'm thinking in particular like Walter Matthau's Lieutenant Garber. That's just a guy who comes into work every day. He's reliable at his job, and now he's dealing with an extraordinary situation. I love that one guy who keeps getting on his back every time. He's like, why are you even dealing with these guys? Like, I wouldn't even talk to these guys.
Just let me run the trains.
Yeah. And he's just like, dude, if you were responsible for human life, you would be a little bit more empathetic in this situation.
Yeah, for real.
But yeah, it sees a bunch of armed men take over a car filled with a very diverse and emblematic group of New Yorkers who kind of fit every single facet of New York. And I was a little concerned because I thought they were kind of just going to be caricatures, but I was surprised that most of them actually are just kind of very normal, reserved people who are just very scared throughout this entire movie, which does kind of bring you a little bit of shocking sadness when the violence eventually erupts in this film, because the tone is light.
Yeah.
So I was not expecting the first time this movie gets violent. I will say that much anyway.
Yeah, I agree. Something else I found interesting was how it seemed to me like the one guy that was negotiating with the cops the entire time.
Yeah, I think it's Robert Shaw. I think is playing Mr. Blue. Obviously, Quint from Jaws.
Yeah, and I was also just as a little side note here, the Mr. Blue, Mr. Green thing. Another Tarantino thing that I was.
Oh like, yeah, I mean this movie.
You stole another thing.
Yeah, no, I mean there's even just the general approach to how the gang operate with each other and how they don't really all totally know each other. It's completely lifted for Reservoir Dogs.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And especially because each one kind of has their own personality of how involved they are in it. I mean, there's the one guy who's like the obvious loose cannon that they're like, this guy I think is here just to kill people. We don't really know why we brought this guy.
Our bad.
And then obviously you have, I think it's Martin Balsam, right? Who plays Mr. Green, the guy from 12 Angry Men and Psycho and All the President's Men. I mean, he's in like everything. God, On the Waterfront, I'm pretty sure he's in too. And he gets the great, obviously, final scene with Walter Matthau. And he is the sort of like ex-MTA worker who has the knowledge that got them down in the trains where they have stopped a car and they are holding, I believe it's, somewhere between 15 and 20 people hostage, and they're demanding like Dr. Evil style, like $1 million. And they were like, bring it to us now. And I just love that the way that this movie moves. I was in terms of the filmmaking and in terms of I assume it's in the script as well, the way that they sort of construct these scenes where it's constantly moving from like the train to the control room to the cops up top to the cops down below in the tunnels to the mayor's office,
showing all aspects of the heist.
And scenes will be constructed to like move between them within like seconds. You'll have them having, a conversation on the train where he's giving his demands back to the control room where he's like, oh God, I gotta figure out how to make that demand possible, to all of a sudden to a call to a different control room. Where they're calling, another lieutenant, where they're calling the mayor's office guy, where they're talking to the mayor, trying to coordinate it all. And just seeing, I think he's trying to highlight overall, they end up kind of actually solving the situation, but I kind of felt like there was a humor with a sense of ineptitude to the way that these things are run and the way that these people are not built to respond or communicate with each other in a way that's actually helpful to the situation.
Yeah,
exactly.
Everything feels incredibly sporadic and unplanned, and just like they've definitely never had any type of protocol to deal with this situation.
And I think that is like touching on the editing there. Like it is interesting that I didn't intentionally do this at all, but both of these movies are edited by two of the best editors of all time. Because, Dog Day Afternoon is edited by D.D. Allen, who did Bonnie and Clyde, The Hustler, Slapshot, The Breakfast Club, Addams Family. I mean, like amazing. And then Taking of Pelham is Jerry Greenberg, who did The French Connection, Apocalypse Now, Kramer vs. Kramer. I mean, it's these people know how to cut a movie.
Absolutely. Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah, Jerry Greenberg also De Palma's. He did Scarface and Body Double.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
No. It's and the DP of this movie shot like Network, Tootsie, The French Connection, The Exorcist. I mean, it's like,
holy moly.
It's pretty crazy, the above the line. The department head talent on these movies.
Yeah, it's amazing to watch something that's just such a simple premise that is deepened by just having skilled filmmakers apply things that would make you actually feel the experience of this. Again, the way that they make you feel the line of communication, and then the claustrophobic nature of actually being in the tunnels, and then sort of like the kind of workers in crisis mode of sweatiness and freaking out and shouting. And I mean, this even more so than Dog Day Afternoon has more New York goddamn accents where they just goddamn and swear and freak out at each other all the goddamn time. It feels like everyone is like 1 second away from knocking the next person out. It doesn't matter who it is.
And the thing with both these movies I love about that era of 1970s New York is like there's no way for anything not to feel grimy. It's just anything you look at felt grimy. Like the airport at the end of Dog Day Afternoon still felt grimy. Like everything is just that era. Everything was dirty.
Yeah.
Well, in particular, in this movie, I mentioned that there was kind of like great location detail to Dog Day Afternoon, but in this, when they shot in the subway, they did get permission to shoot in the MTA. Although they had to sign a $2 million insurance agreement or something.
Yes.
That because they said we don't want this hasn't happened before, and we don't want your movie inspiring people to do this.
To me, the funniest part about the MTA thing is that they insisted that they couldn't show any graffiti on the train cars.
They did that for a lot of movies. They did that in Death Wish too. We mentioned that on our Death Wish episode. They did that too.
But I love that the MTA's reasoning is that they thought it was a fad that would be over in a year or two, and the graffiti would go away, and they didn't want to encourage it because it was almost eradicated.
It's almost gone.
Yeah.
Oh, that's hilarious.
As we all know, graffiti doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
We're in a graffiti-less world.
We're here in 2019. Oh man!
But yeah, they were saying that the on-set work. I mean, they probably wouldn't get away with this anymore. It was probably unsafe working conditions working down there in the tunnels shooting this movie. But they say that actually shooting down there, that they couldn't clean it up. They were like there were rats. There were it was just the dirtiest possible shooting location that they could have filmed, and they have them all sitting down there.
Yeah.
The entire time.
Yeah. So I mean, it's pretty gross to look at, and then the way that obviously it also traces that kind of grime all the way up the sort of political office, all the way to the mayor. I love the scenes with the mayor.
Mayor's amazing.
And every scene, once again, it's like what we were speaking with the Dog Day Afternoon with these cops that are just focused more on their optics.
Yeah.
It's like the entire time he's just focused on well, you got a re-election coming up. You're going to have to go out and look like you care, man.
Yeah. And then he's homesick, just with this streaming cold is this character choice is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, and an amazing...
kind of he's helpless and isn't going to help at all. He's just incapable.
And the thing I love about that detail is it connects him with the robbers, because there's the one robber who also has the cold.
Right.
So it just implicitly ties these scenes to you together to be these guys are actually in the same place, despite the fact that none of these people ever end up interacting with each other beyond what we see on the camera. That's pretty amazing.
They're all just playing telephone.
Is that in the filmmaking here, you have a tricky thing to figure out, that all of these people are communicating to one other character via the phone, but a lot of these people aren't contacting each other. There's no connection between the robbers and the mayor. There's a line of communication where the mayor's assistant talks to one of the lieutenants. Yeah, the lieutenants who talks to one of the control room guys, who talks to the other control room guy, who talks to the robbers. So
needless to say, trust is difficult to develop in that circumstance.
I feel like you're watching a cinematic game of broken telephone happening, and it is genuinely enthralling to watch it happen because of the speed of the way that this moves the plot along.
And that's something also that so Peter Stone, who wrote this, also wrote Charade, which is another brilliant screenplay, and he excels at keeping the pace moving really fast, but still giving you an enormous amount of character detail, and kind of laugh out loud humorous moments that are actually saying something. But some of these things are two-line exchanges. I know there's a point where the two cops that are actually bringing the money to them, the one cop, I don't think we see these actors at any prior time. One of them picks up the bag and goes, "This is $1 million." The other guy goes, "It's what it buys, not what it weighs." Which is such a brilliant two-line thing about this understanding of how much money is in this bag of they're carrying around the city.
Yeah, another great line when they're talking about the value and the money. I believe one of the hostages is "Oh, you guys are getting money for this? So how much am I worth?" And then the guy's $1 million, and he's like, "That's not so terrific." Just speaking on, it's you guys are doing this all I value my human life. You're doing it for $1 million.
Yeah, there's lots of great just sort of writerly interactions between individual characters. So even if you only see them for a scene, you feel you're just that's a person who works that job every day, who has who is a real human person basically. Right. And they pepper the entire film like this, which I actually find kind of moving, because this ends up becoming kind of just like a people on the ground working people movie, where it's about all of them as an ensemble dealing with like this, you know, this horrible situation. I mean, the villain is, particularly the villain anyway, overall, is Robert Shaw's character, who is kind of like this really dispassionate British mercenary killer.
Yeah.
Well, which we should talk about. This is cops, right? So I think that clearly this movie influenced Reservoir Dogs a lot, but I think the movie that it influenced the most, and I would say it probably wouldn't exist without this movie, is Die Hard.
Oh,
because
100%.
Die Hard is basically this movie, except in a skyscraper, and they've inserted a hero that shows up to stop the heist.
Yeah.
But like the whole dynamic between how the heist works, how the criminals plan, how their plan relies on the cops reacting a certain way, and how the cop and like all of how that stuff interacts is the mechanics of Die Hard, but then also the humor, the sense of humor, and the way they approach the character humor, and that it's so much the DNA of the movie.
No, you're 100%. I actually wrote down the exact same movie, that and Speed. Two movies that those two movies would not exist without taking Pelham 1, 2, 3. So it's awesome to go back and and see the people who did like the original construction of something like this, because you really do watch this and you're like, I don't think at this time there's any other movie that looks like this or moves like this between scenes, because like it has to cover so much geography, and so much like dense character action in such a short amount of time, that also implicitly as a viewer, you're watching that, you kind of get swept up in it, but it also sets the stakes, because you know that you're watching a time, you're on a time clock to get this money there in the first place. And I love when a lot of movies do this, just in general, when someone thinks up a concept of like, okay, we demand $1 million, and they're like, okay, we will try to get you that $1 million. And that this just walks you through like the physical, literal logistics of how to move $1 million from where you're pulling it from to them in that amount of time. And the amount of drama they wring out of people just being like, where are we taking it? How are we getting it there? And then I love the two cops who are eventually driving it in the back of the car being like, we got 28 blocks, we're floored it, we're going to make it. And then he immediately hangs up the thing and he's like, we're not going to make it. And obviously that climaxes with this great thing where they almost hit a dude, just a random, again, another New York detail of a guy riding his bike with his headphones on or whatever. They almost hit him, they roll over and crash, and your heart just like sinks into your chest. You're like, no, because
you just know there's no hope after that.
They're gonna, like, they have no chance now, they're gonna totally kill someone down there.
And that in this movie you know that these guys will kill those hostages.
Oh yeah, because of that one scene.
Like exactly. At most movies with a tone like this, with humor and stuff like this, you don't really believe that anyone's going to get hurt. This movie manages to balance real stakes and real jeopardy with really a very, very funny, entertaining screenplay and performance style.
Yeah, I kind of implied it before, but that one scene where the cop moves forward and he's just like, and I mean, God, you gotta love him. Another great, just goddamn New Yorker. He's walking through. He's like, hey, you won't shoot me. I'm coming up there. I'm coming to you. And he's like, dude, I swear to God, I'm gonna fucking shoot you.
I'm letting you know.
And he just totally calls his bluff and just boom, shoots him away. And it's pretty gruesome. And that really does set up the importance of this sequence where they're moving the money and when the car flips.
And I believe that's the first kill too, right? So that's where it really sets that stage where it's like these guys are going to do what they told you they're going to do.
That really makes you feel it when those cops don't get there in time. Although I do love that Walter Matthau is just like, wow, I'm an idiot. That
plan away.
I mean, he's like, I'm an idiot. I could just tell them it's here. He's like, the money's here. The money's here.
They don't know. They can't see.
Yeah. And I love that too, where it's like there's smart people on both sides of this negotiation, and they're actually in a cat and mouse with each other is great and very rare. It's actually surprisingly rare, because you think that would be the whole point of a negotiation scene, but it's actually very rarely works that way in movies.
Yeah, no, that's completely invaluable. I have the same note. Like the idea of two people clashing and outmaneuvering each other when they're both smart people is like really, really important for you to actually buy into what's happening at all.
Yeah.
And I mean, these two, I mean, talk about clashing personalities of professionalism too, where one is like just cold cruelty, and the other one's got like more of like a sardonic like sense of humor to him, but also
he's
like
poking fun at the situation almost the entire time, it seems.
No, Walter Matthau's incredible in this film. I think if anyone kind of steals the screen from anybody else, because it does largely play as an ensemble film where there's not really, you know, clear. If there is a protagonist to the film, it's probably Walter Matthau. And I mean, he also gets the amazing final closing shot of the film, which we'll probably get here soon.
We will get to.
But yeah, I would just say the way that this captures kind of like the quick thinking energy of, you know, like working people in crisis, and is a movie populated with just like the most quintessential cinematic New Yorkers I've just ever seen. But also manages to fit in like, you know, critiques of sort of like systemic communication between these, you know, these different institutions as like they are clearly poorly managing the situation. And it even, again, once again, and it brings up Vietnam, and that one of the guys is the Vietnam vet who they beat. And it's interesting that they can sort of like crack jokes about all of this stuff, but also have the backdrop of like very serious subject matter, and you not like lose the texture of that threat and that violence. But you also, this movie does just fucking breeze by. Like I was sitting there watching it and I was like, this is just a lot of fun.
Which feels odd at times when we're talking about, you know, a police officer being gunned down at point blank range.
I don't know. I feel like everyone just immediately empathizes with like disgruntled and like grumpy working employees. I feel like everyone's been there.
We've all had a bad day.
And I think just by the time you get to that part of the movie, you already know you're in such capable tonal hands that you know it's not gonna screw up that stuff, you know? Like you're willing to give it the benefit of the doubt that this is going to work, even though they're taking something that would normally be extremely hard to watch and making it you know, have a sense of humor to it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
like I mean, they even have a gag to start off that gunfight that the cops start shooting at them, and they have the one cop that's been standing in the middle between the subway tunnel and the subway train,
like imagining the standoff,
right? And he does that little finger gun thing, and as he does the finger gun, the actual shot goes off. And then, but that also that's a funny gag, but then that sparks them having to kill, I believe it's the conductor, because they said rules are rules. If you shoot at us, we're killing a hostage.
We're gonna, exactly.
So once again, they're balancing that tone where it's like they start with a gag and then end with a pretty horrifying death.
Yeah, there's like there's a real like ticking time bomb, seat of your pants kind of energy that just like pummels this whole thing. But again, to mix that kind of like wry humor, but also the consequences of action at the same time, it really does help when we transition into the back half of this and they end up getting their hands on the money, and they end up, the question then becomes, now that we've figured out, we spent like an hour figuring out the logistics of how to get the money, what the fuck are the logistics of actually getting that money out of there where they can escape? I mean, they trapped themselves in a subway tunnel where we can see the car at all times. So it's just and what's interesting is that it plays that aspect up as more of a mystery, where you kind of watch that unfold.
I love that this movie takes an approach to a heist movie where you have no idea what their plan is other than watching it unfold, but you know that they have a plan. And so you immediately have to empathize with the MTA cops, because they're the ones that are actually, you're seeing them make the decisions and how to react to things and how to do things, as opposed to in Dog Day Afternoon, where because the plan goes wrong so quickly, you only ever really know what the cops are planning to do when you see the ramifications of it. You only see the things happening. You don't see them planning how to try to get to Al Pacino's character. And then we are with Al Pacino and with the people in the bank as they're trying to figure out how to respond to what the cops are doing. So you're of course gonna relate to them. And it's just so interesting between these two movies, like the narrative technique of getting the audience's sympathies and relation and everything on the side of the people that are actively making decisions to try to solve a problem, rather than the people that already are in control and have a plan for how to deal with it.
Oh, no, absolutely. And that's a really fun and engaging experience where you are trying to think ahead of characters and being like, how are they going to figure that out? What is going to happen?
Yeah,
there?
exactly.
And I mean, they do set it up pretty cleverly where they address the idea that there is a dead man switch where no one can actually man a car without like an active person with their hand putting a lot of pressure onto the engine or the gear, basically. And it's interesting that like pretty quickly afterward, I don't know how it is that Walter Matthau's character comes up with the thing where he's just like, man, remember how I told you earlier there was that thing that couldn't be done? What if they did it? He's like, these goddamn guys, they're so smart, they're maniacs, they might just do it.
Yeah.
And they immediately like turn the cars around and they're heading back for them, and because they have the train going at like pretty goddamn fast speeds.
It's going.
Well, because I mean, it was really smart that they set up the idea of they were like, you have to keep everything green going or we kill a hostage, so that the train can't stop and that they think someone's on it because it's moving, obviously. So it is pretty smart. And then you get a pretty amazing underground shootout here where a lot of things just go wrong. I did find it funny that the guy, that cop, just has amazing patience. That guy who was on the train the entire time. He was one of the guys who was like kidnapped, basically. And the second that they jump off, he also just jumps off with his gun and hides in the shadows. And I mean, it's a great shot where you can't see him at all in the shadows. And he's like, I just saw a guy jump off there. I swear to God, we got to go get him. But this final confrontation that happens here is interesting because, from what I understand, they didn't originally plan it to be Walter Matthau's character, but I guess he just kind of stole the screen. But he's the one who goes down there because he's not qualified to go and like shoot armed robbers or anything. Yeah. But when he goes down there, and you can see that there's like, again, one of my favorite things that happens in movies, the kind of like begrudging respect of two professional who think they're good at what each other do. I mean, it's total Heat vibes, obviously, when these two run into each other. I believe the one guy who's like the psychopath is the guy who gets shot right off the bat by the cop. And then Robert Shaw shoots.
And am I correct in remembering that he's the dad from that 70s show?
Oh, shit, he might be.
Oh, is it? I didn't even
notice. Notice. That would have been amazing. Yeah, the guy from RoboCop too, right?
Yeah.
I think that is who it is. You know what? I'm gonna check.
Or something. Yeah. I can't remember his name. But.
I did not notice that, but that would be pretty amazing. I mean, this whole thing is stacked with just like recognizable faces of these of these guys. But yeah, this final confrontation I thought was really interesting because, again, it's another sense of they don't tell you too much about these characters, but they say just enough to reveal an entire history that you can imagine. Yeah. And that bit where Robert Shaw kills himself, where he's just like, oh, do you guys in New York still have the death penalty? And he was just like, I don't think so anymore. Either way, you're coming with me. And then he electrocutes himself to death using the rails.
And that irony that he also electrocutes himself, just like, I think, doesn't he mention the chair or something like that? I thought he did.
Oh, yeah. Do you guys still have the
chair? I thought that's what he did. Just that irony where he's like, electrify. He's like, I'll do it myself. Yeah, it brought this like, well, I guess what it was saying is that either he was going to be successful or he was going to die. That was essentially what
it was. A very Sal move.
Yeah,
but with a lot more like, for me, it was like a creepy like control to it. It was just like it was so dispassionate, his own suicide.
Yeah,
that it kind of freaked me out a little bit watching it.
It really felt planned, like he was prepared to do it the entire time.
No, absolutely.
Because he stares at him blankly. Like there was like now what are you gonna do?
Yeah,
he'd much rather almost. It felt like he thought that was a win, in a sense, where he's like, well, you didn't get me, I got myself.
And I was glad to see though that wasn't the end of the film, because of course, as much as Robert Shaw is a great presence in this film, he is kind of like the outsider in what does feel like a sort of like working New York people's movie.
Yeah.
So I love this what feels like an epilogue to the movie of It is, sorry, I forget what the actor's name was again. Yeah, so it's Martin Balsam's character, Mr. Green, who ends up escaping with his share of the money that he's going to go get, and he is obviously been laid off by the MTA, and you can tell that his apartment is pretty shitty, and that he's really excited to have money. And the moment of just pure joy when he's like jumping on the bed with the money and everything like that, he's real excited. And Walter Matthau and goddamn Jerry Stiller, who we haven't mentioned, but Jerry Stiller,
right. Jerry Stiller's amazing.
He's so good. I was like, is that Maury Ballstein from Zoolander the whole time? But this sequence where these guys are like, hey man, we're just asking questions, we're just doing our job, you're probably not our guy, but he couldn't look more goddamn suspicious.
Yeah,
he
put
the money in the oven, and he has to antagonize them. I feel like every time they were like, okay, we're leaving, and he was like, hey, stop harassing people, I'm just here trying to make a living, trying to live my life. I've been in my apartment all day. Fuck you guys. He's making a big show of it, like classic goddamn New Yorker.
Yeah.
And Walter Matthau is like, fine, we're getting the hell out of here. But earlier in the film, and this is important to mention, while he's talking on the phone, because Walter Matthau, you gotta love him. He's talking on the phone with Mr. Blue, Robert Shaw, and I think it's during the interaction where he's like, you have 48 minutes. Come on, dude, or you have 49 minutes. He's like, come on, we need more time. You have 49 minutes. He's like, can you stop saying that? He's like, you have 48 minutes. It's Martin Balsam characters, I believe. He sneezes over the radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Walter Matthau says, Gesundheit. Because it's polite.
Yeah, and that's what he does.
It's a character detail. He's just polite.
And in the moment, it's just a very funny moment. You don't think it's a thing,
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because it's another small detail to this where you're like, yeah, why would you be saying Gesundheit to one of the armed robbers?
Yeah.
But as he's leaving the apartment, the guy's gotten away with it. He's got all the money in the oven. He's ready. He's done. He can't hold that sneeze in.
He just can't.
He sneezes, and he hears it as he's closing the door, and he goes, Gesundheit.
Yeah.
And then he's like,
yeah,
light bulb.
And I love he IDs him from his sneeze. Is amazing.
Yeah, unbelievable. And the face that he makes,
the best final shot,
one of the best final shots.
It's literally just one of those. It's hard to explain, but it's I got you, motherfucker. Yeah. And it's such a
it's almost like a Columbo kind of like.
Oh yeah, mad Columbo vibes. And also though, I felt like a sense of it's the end of the day and everyone's had a rough day,
and he's kind of like, it's over.
Yeah,
we got it. We got you.
Yeah, it's such a great moment, and to know that that's the place to end your movie on is so rare sometimes too.
I felt like they could have even cut to Mr. Green going, "Oh man," like a shrug.
Oh my god,
it's such a classic ending. My god, and just such a heavy film in regards to what it's doing with
the
its
stakes
violence,
were pretty
and
heavy.
The stakes are heavy. Obviously, tonally, it's nothing like Dog Day Afternoon, but just to end on that little, it's a joke. It literally is a gag that they end on.
Well, do you know what? Do you know what that got? And I mean, this goes for the humor for a lot of the film. What I kind of got from that was that I feel like this is just them. This is like a city plagued sometime, with corruption and poverty and rising violence. And I felt like this was like the working person's, this is how you stay sane living in this place, is by having this attitude, by having this, this kind of it kind of predates that kind of irony, but it almost does feel like everyone's kind of just in a constant state of, if I don't joke about some of this stuff, I'm gonna go fucking crazy with how much stress I'm under, and what's interesting is that it extends that not just to people in a crisis situation. It feels like it extends that to every minor character who we see in this film feels like they're just having just an awful day, and that you think you get to the end of the day where he's got his money and he can't even have that. He can't have it.
His face
just it's such, I mean, it really is. I do find that this is in terms of capturing a certain type of New Yorker persona, like this is the best movie that does it. I mean, it really is. Like that kind of blue collar working man New York feeling is,
Yeah, no, it totally feels like it's come alive in this movie. And maybe
one moment I do love in it is also how, Walter Matthau's dealing with the cops via the phone the whole time. And then when he finally leaves and goes to see the cop that he's been dealing with the whole time, he sees that it's a black cop, and he clearly never pictured that in his head. and his performance and the way it's written in this moment, he's just like, oh, I thought you would have been shorter. And then they move on, and you see the black cop who's like, yeah, I'm sure that's what you thought. It's such a brilliant moment. Yeah,
that's great. Yeah, that is good.
No, yeah, that we could probably do a whole thing about just how peppered this is with details. I mean, I particularly loved the bit about the mayor where he's having like this quandary about what he's going to do, and he's asking like all his different assistants, and he's just like, well, you got an election, but also you can't deal with like terrorists, or you can't do all these juggling all these things, and the one
realizing it's not about the human lives at all.
No, yeah, and the one moment where she's just like, well, you could look at it one way. 18 guaranteed voters. and she says it like with such a cynical attitude. And the best part is the mayor's reaction, who's like, oh yeah. Like he takes it genuinely, and he looks back at her, and no joke, he fucking goes, I forget exactly what his wording is, but he goes, I think we handled that well. And she is just like in awe that he did not pick up on that she was being
in charge.
Like she was being a cynical asshole in that moment. Yeah. And then to see that decision work through the chain of command as they finally, actually start moving the money, that's what finally gets them to start moving the money, and why his quandary is why they're late at all with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we'll enter the reductive rating round and final statements on this one. This one got a pretty easy 4 from me. I mean, I think the thing that's particularly notable about this is, I mean, a couple things that we've already said. The idea of sort of two clashing professional smart people, and also the fact that this is just the kind of movie that doesn't have any beautiful movie stars. This really does feel kind of like a bunch of character actors that would actually resemble working people. We got transit workers. We have sort of we have small time cops. We have assistants to the mayor's office. You have all these kind of different people. I mean, I still just can't believe that detail of that guy riding his bike in front of traffic, even though there's a whole line of people blocking it, knowing that there's something happening. Everyone's watching to see what's happening, and that one guy just oblivious, riding his bike, having a great day. Yeah. You gotta love that.
That's the most New York attitude is that this is my street.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the way that this again just juggles a real grit and texture of a 70s New York in a corrupt city, with violence, and the way that it translates that into something that's that has real attitude and a real sense of fun and humor to it, that really does capture the feeling of, this is an incredibly stressful period of time. This is an incredibly stressful class to be in.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot to handle that. And I feel like this eventually, as it moves across all these different people, it kind of just becomes an ode to a collective of working people, which is, a kind of movie that always appeals to me. I mean, recently, I think it was not crazy about all of his recent stuff, but that movie Sully that Clint Eastwood did with Tom Hanks, I got a similar vibe from that, where it was just kind of doing something extraordinary, moving cash from the logistics of moving cash that fast. Doing something extraordinary like that is really just a collective of ordinary people.
Right.
So I got a similar feel from this, and to me, that's honestly a genuinely kind of moving idea. And the fact that, again, this movie is just filmed with lean, economical filmmaking that moves you through this with at a breakneck pace and contains the bare minimum of necessary information.
Yeah.
And as a friend of the show, Will Sloan, critic in Toronto, pointed out, he felt that it kind of the bare minimum of information kind of resembled that everyone is just kind of a cog in a larger machine. And I thought that was just a really good way of putting what I think that they capture here. And before I go, one last note. it was noted by in a Toronto interview, the producer of the film said that this film did absolutely gangbusters at the box office in New York, Toronto, London, Paris, cities with subways.
Okay.
And absolutely nowhere else. Nobody fucking gave a shit because who cares about a subway? Yeah.
That's not realistic.
And I thought that was just an amazing detail.
Who would go underground anyway?
Yeah.
Why are y'all traveling underground?
It's only going to cause problems. We know this. That's why we don't have underground
big city
subways.
folk.
Exactly. So yeah, easy 4 from me. For you?
Easy 4 for me as well. It's just like watching the procedure. You know, this film was just so much fun to watch unravel. Seeing the cops, you know, go from just throughout the hierarchy of everything they had to go through, going through, you know, their
even the way the camera moves through that control room and stuff. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And what I like too is the cops themselves are always kind of poking fun at each other. And, you know, we had that, you mentioned it earlier when they had the one guy who's like, why are you even dealing with the terrorists and things like that?
Oh yeah.
You know, it's just all American guy. Just let him go, apparently. But yeah, I loved watching the procedure, and that's what this film does masterfully. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5.
Yeah, for you, Keith.
I would give it a 4. I'm going to knock it up to a 4.5 just because the score is so amazing, which we didn't really touch on. But the David Shire did the score, and I think it's one of my favorite scores from the 70s because it has that sort of jazz thing that they were kind of trying to play with in the 70s, but does it in this like really unique way where it's trying to like almost only be the bass notes and the high end notes, so it doesn't get swallowed up by the sound of the train. And I just think it's like an incredibly smart and well constructed score. So to me, that gives that little extra boost that would put it up to the 4.5 for me.
Nice. Well, I think that will wrap it up for the goddamn mayor of goddamn New York City. That was the taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, as well as Dog Day Afternoon. Keith, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And bringing these films with you. We had a great time. This is the part of the show where if you've got anything to plug, you can do it here. And from what I understand, with amazing timing, you just had a film announced yesterday.
I did. That's still a long way away in terms of making it, but I do have a couple movies coming out soon. I have Corporate Animals and Little Monsters, both of which are fun movies that were at Sundance early this year and come out in the next couple of months.
Sweet.
Very cool.
We'll look out for them.
Absolutely. I think in 1 week's time from us, for you guys patrons, you guys are going to get your bonus episode. You are going to hear us. We just got out of Midsummer. We had a great time watching it. I mean, I'm assuming by the time you guys hear this, it's been out for, I think, a week or two, so you guys have seen it. But while browsing through the opinions on Midsummer, I realized that a lot of people are not as well versed in folk horror as I thought people were. Jamie and I, obviously, we've done some deep cuts folk horror on this before. We've done The Blade on Satan's Claw. We've done Hammer horror films like Captain Kronos. So we decided we were going to do some, the big one, because we haven't done it yet. The Wicker Man, 1973, is going to be your bonus episode. Oh, yeah. And also my personal favorite, and I think the most underrated of the folk horror films, and that's Witchfinder General from 1968.
Hell of a Vincent Price
with
performance.
An amazing Vincent Price performance, an absolutely like grim, sadistic film about wielding political power in times of chaos, especially in the 17th century witch-burning Britain. So you can imagine that goes some places. But in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be back with a guest, and we're going to be talking 2 films I, again, haven't seen. These guests, they're killing me. We're going to be doing Bill and Ted's Bogus Adventure.
Beautiful.
1991, and we're going to be pairing it with another 1991 film called World Apartment Horror. I asked this guy for a deep cut, one that, and only 100 people have logged it on Letterboxd, so I assume that's what it is. But it's Yatsuhiro Otomo, the writer and director behind Akira.
So good.
I believe it's either his first and maybe his only live-action film from 1991.
Cool.
So that's what you guys can expect for your free episode in 2 weeks' time. That being said, I think that will wrap it up for this week. Thanks, as always, for listening. and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
Yeah. Nailed it. We always wait for it because.
You never know. I think you're only like
number two. Yeah.